Welcome to the Real Jesus Experience. Today we are talking to Dan Worrell, who is pastor of operations at Houston Northwest Church in Houston, as you would expect. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chad. Honored to be here.
Yeah, thank you. We connected several years ago now when I was going through my wall experience. And I just remembered that your story was really inspirational and helpful. And I knew that when this idea came and we started doing it, I knew for sure that I had to get you on here and get you to share that with all of our listeners.
That's awesome.
So why don't we start out by going back to the beginning? And where were you born?
Yeah, so I was born in New Orleans. My family was living in Luling, which is just outside of New Orleans, and I was born there. We only lived there for about a year, and then moved to Dickinson, Texas. My dad was working for Union Carbide for, at the time, probably 15, 16 years. And then I don't remember any of that, but then we moved to Oklahoma, Bartlesville, where my dad worked for Phillips 66. And so I grew up there from a couple of years old to third grade, and then moved back to Houston area and grew up in South Houston, which is Friendswood, basically from fourth grade on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have much for like memories from your time in Oklahoma when you were growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually when I came to know the Lord. I was in the third grade.
Oh.
But yeah, I remember in Oklahoma several incidences where tornado warnings went off, and we had to go to the hallway and get in our assumed position of in case a tornado came. There's a few of those. But grew up in a church there, went to Wesleyan Church there, and also went to private school from kindergarten all the way up to second grade at Wesleyan private school in Bartlesville, and then went to my first public school in third grade. Yeah.
Okay, so you came to know the Lord in
Third
grade?
Yeah.
Third grade?
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously then you guys are church-going family.
Yeah.
What was your mom and dad's faith like?
Yeah, so they were always sharing just their love of Christ, and we always went to church. We were the family that was at church every time the doors were open. Growing up in church, there were Wednesday nights, Sunday mornings, Sunday nights. So yeah, that was my experience, and went through Awanas, went through. I forgot what the other name was, but yeah, a lot of VBS summers and growing up that way.
Yeah. That seems to kind of be a common theme here in Texas.
It was, yeah.
Church-going folks.
It was kind of like the prereq of families. That's what you did with your kids. So,
all right. So do you have any brothers and sisters?
I do. I'm the youngest of four. So I've got an older brother. It's 10 years older than I. My other brother's 7 years older than I, and then my sister's 6 years older than I am. So I'm the baby of the family.
Okay, yeah. You were lagging behind a little bit.
Quite a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that like a
Surprise.
surprise?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, when we had our youngest, he's several years younger, and I told my mom, I said, Mom, I think we got rid of all of our stuff. And she's like, how do you think I felt when I knew I was having you? So that was 6 years later. But I'm obviously the best, so you know. That's what I tell my siblings. But anyways, so yeah, I'm the youngest in the family, and just always looking up to my siblings, and especially my older brother. Growing up, he was a great football player in Bartlesville and went off to play in college. But yeah, my dad and mom, definitely examples of Christian family, God-loving parents, and that's what started the basis of my understanding. Yeah.
Who would you say then, out of maybe your older brother or your dad or your mom, who was like maybe the greatest influence?
My dad,
faith-wise.
Yeah, absolutely, my dad. Later down in life, or later along in life, when we moved to Friendswood. every Saturday, growing up through adolescence, he would take me to, we'd either go shoot guns at the gun range. We'd shoot a brick of 22 every Saturday, or we'd go play tennis. And for those years, we would go through James Dobson Adolescence, and so he would take me through those books, and he did that with my other siblings as well. But that was very impactful on me in my growth. Just those ages of adolescence, and I went through a really hard 6th grade year, and just having my dad there all the way up until his death about 9 years ago. I'd speak to him daily. He was always very impactful in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's great. Huh. What did it look like then? I mean, you're probably 8 years old in 3rd grade,
Yeah.
typically. What brought on this readiness
Yeah.
to come to faith?
I think that I had the head knowledge. I mean, going to church and understanding from Sunday school aspect and understanding what my parents talked about. I think that I was in the living room with my dad and mom and made the decision there. And I think at that point it was out of fear in the sense of like being left with all my siblings. I was kind of the only one that was not a believer. And so that fear of like, I don't want to be the only one in my family that's not a believer. And not understanding the whole sanctification of what the Lord did on the cross at that time, but knowing enough head knowledge of what he did for me, I made a decision to follow Jesus with my parents at that time in my living room in Oklahoma. So yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So how did that decision impact, if you could remember this far back, just your day-to-day life? Did it have a big impact on?
It did. So we moved in my 3rd grade to Texas and to Houston, Friendswood. So my 4th grade year, we started going to church, and I was on fire for the Lord. And I tell people this: I was a pitcher, and we made the all-star team, and I was supposed to pitch for the summer league. And I took my friends to church camp, and my coach called my parents and said, "Hey, he needs to pitch. Like, this is important." And I met with my coach, and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to go to church camp because I think that's more important than pitching." And that was the first time that I stood up for my belief and not going and doing the things that I wanted to do. And so obviously I was done with the season and I wasn't on the team anymore, but
they booted you.
Well, I mean, it was going to be over after that All-Star weekend game, but
Gotcha.
I took 4 or 5 of my friends from that team later the next year, and it was just that impact of like wanting my friends to experience what I was experiencing. And we went to Frontier Camp in East Texas, and so yeah, I was on fire for the Lord.
You don't see, I mean, at least not in my experience, you don't see that kind of devotion and commitment at that age.
Yeah.
That is, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. It was interesting because I remember even in 4th grade here being new to the school, but also kind of getting picked fun of that a little bit. So
was it a bumpy transition coming into Houston Public School?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So my big brother went off to college, and so that was a transition, moving here, and then just new friends and trying to figure out what Friendswood and school was. But yeah.
You mentioned that you had a rough 6th grade.
Yeah.
Any details you'd like to?
I became rebellious in 6th grade, and I don't know what that came from. just a time in my life to where I was getting in trouble. I mowed lawns for the summer work, and then back then I had a friend, we could buy fireworks from a magazine. And so we would save up. I would save up all my lawn mowing money and buy fireworks, these huge packets, and then I would break them all up and take them to school and sell them in little packets and double my money. So I threw fireworks out the window of the school bus, and I'll never forget this one time. I was got called in the principal's office, and he's like, "Empty your pockets." I'm like, "Oh no!" So I had all these lady fingers in my pockets and firecrackers, and I grabbed them all in my pocket, and I just kind of pulled my hands out of my pocket, and I had them all in my hands. And he's like, "Open your hands." And so I opened them, and all these lady fingers and everything are just falling out of my pockets. I almost got expelled from school, from school for real.
Whoa.
And so later in life, I took my kids back to Friendswood in junior high in 6th grade, and I said, "Hey, you see that little building off from the main campus?" And they're like, "Yeah." I said, "That was in-house suspension." I said, "I spent pretty much my whole 6th grade life there." But I was just rebellious, and I think that looking back now, Chad, I think that some of that was the transition. In that move, I was a pretty skinny kid growing up, but in 5th, 6th grade, I started putting on weight. I got heavy, and I was getting picked on a little bit. And then I had a little bit of a learning disability. So when I was a little kid, I did speech therapy and had a little bit of dyslexia. And so I think some of that was coming out, and then coming out in rebellious. And so I'll never forget coming out of 6th grade into 7th grade was football, and that was kind of my excitement for football, because my brother, Darren, my oldest brother, got recruited from Barry Switzer at OU and A&M and LSU, and he ended up going to Arkansas on a very successful football career. So I saw that, and I was just like, "Oh, I'm going to play football, and this is going to be great." And so, but I'll never forget my dad one time, because I didn't do good in school. I was kind of the class clown, and he made me sleep with a shovel. And I had a progress report, and he said, "Hey, you're going to sleep with this shovel, and if you don't take your grades serious, you're going to live with that shovel, and that's what you're going to do to make a living. There's nothing wrong with that. But I want you to know that if you don't turn your life around and take school seriously and get your grades and quit acting like a class clown, you're going to live with that shovel." And that literally was in my bed. And so that impacted me. And he's like, "Listen, there's nothing wrong with making a living by a shovel, but this right now, you have to make this decision." And so in my 7th grade, I started football and came out of that kind of that rebellious stage.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is, man, sounds like you had a pretty awesome dad,
Yeah.
to be honest.
He was.
That's cool. So you had 3 older siblings.
Yep.
And how many kids do you have?
I have 3.
You have 3 kids.
Yeah.
Was that planned in any way, or did you have a desire to have a bigger family because of your experience?
Actually, Gretchen and I had our first child. We got married in 99. I think we were 23, 24. And we didn't have our first child till 3 years later. And Kylie, who's now 21, was our first child. And then in between our first and second child, we had a miscarriage. And so pretty late term miscarriage. I shared this actually, I taught in the young marriage class or mid-marriage class the other day. And Roger Goza and Shirley Goza were our teachers at the church, very influential family on our lives and in the church lives. But he was the first person I called when Gretchen experienced that. We were at home. She was just miscarried, and I was kind of like, "What do I do with this?" And like, do I take it somewhere? I mean, like, it was pretty traumatic, and so we had a miscarriage from first to second. But I shared with the class last week or 2 weeks ago that the importance of doing life with a Sunday school class or a life group. That family or that group came around us as family, and it was super impactful in how we got through that and just how the Lord used that. And so that was our first child into transition. Then we had Luke, who was our second child, and then in between Luke and Ryan, we had another miscarriage. It was early on. It wasn't as termed as the first miscarriage, And it was kind of like, we're done. Like, Gretchen was like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's embarrassing. And it was just, she just wrestled with that. And Lord used that too, both those instances, and to where he was like, you need to be sharing this with people, and so people can see what I'm doing through you in that. And she wrestled with that, but then she realized, okay, Lord, I'll be obedient in that, and began to share her story. And so many ladies at the church and around the community that she would share that with were like, hey, I experienced the same thing, or I'm wrestling with that. And so we had a second miscarriage in between our second and third, and then finally we had Ryan. And so we have a 21-year-old now, a 19-year-old, and then he just turned 15 2 weeks ago. I'm teaching him how to drive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, well, you've been through that a couple of times already. So are your nerves like just completely so frazzled that it doesn't even faze you anymore?
Yeah, he's been pretty good. There's just been a few instances that I grabbed the dashboard with my fingers in it, but on that it's been pretty good. He's not bad. So we got out on the feeder of 99, and he was like, "This is really fast." And I was like, "Yeah, we're not going to go long ways, but I do circles, and I just gradually get further and further from the house, which means more speed." And so in the neighborhood's 20, and then it goes 30, 35, 40, and then you get out to 50, 60. And so that's where we're at right now. We're at 50, 60. So
nice.
Yeah.
That's a good strategy. I like that.
Well, my dad taught me that. So.
Yeah, well, of course he would have. But I'm going to use it because I got that coming up in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
So I'm going to fully use that one.
It's pretty easy. So.
Yeah, that's good. So saved in grade 3 at 8. Married at 23.
Mm-hmm.
What happens
22.
between? Sorry.
Oh, it's 21, 22. Yeah.
Oh, 21, 22. In 99, you said, right?
Yeah.
So you guys are celebrating 25 years
next month.
Next month.
Yeah.
Wow.
We just celebrated. We went out of town last week, but our actual anniversary is July 24th. 25 years.
No kidding.
Yeah.
My wife and mine is July 17th.
Awesome.
We're just like boom, boom, right there.
It's a good month.
Yeah. Hot month. Not sure what we were thinking there.
A hot month. Yeah.
So what was junior high school like then for you?
Yeah.
You came out of that rebellious phase.
Yeah.
And what did that look like?
So still didn't take school seriously. In fact, pretty prideful. When I started playing sports, I was playing baseball and football through junior high and into high school. And you just got to think through. My second brother was playing high school football as well. He could have gone and played football in college, but he didn't. My father played college football, and then my oldest brother, again, successful. I was so arrogant. I remember telling a teacher this one time. I think what I said was, I don't have to worry about what's on the test. I just have to read a scoreboard, and as long as we're winning, it's okay. I mean, that's how arrogant I was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I did not take school seriously, and it really penalized me because when I became a junior and senior, playing football, I stopped playing. They'd said, hey, you need to pick baseball or football, and obviously I'm built for football. So my junior year, I stepped away from baseball. But I remember talking to my head coach, and I said, hey, I'm getting recruited by some of these schools, some of them out of state. But where's A&M? Where's Texas? Where's Arkansas? Where are they at? They're not recruiting me. And they said, well, they're not going to invest in you because you don't take your school seriously. In fact, your grades show that. And so I was like, wow, that stinks. And so at the time, I started dating Gretchen in my junior year. And so back to the pride issue, I was like, man, I was going to go play D1 football and be after like my brother and all that. So I had that image. And I'll never forget Coach Chiswick, Gene Chiswick, who came to Friendswood and started watching me play, recruited me. And I went up and visited Stephen F. Austin. That's where he was from, or where he was coaching at the time. And loved it. And I'm like, hey, this is great. They got a good program. And I'll never forget, he said, hey, do you want to play for me, son? I said, I do. And he said, all right, let's go down to your counselor's office. I'm like, okay. He's like, I need you to prove to me that you want to play for me. I'm I'm like, all right. So we go down there and he changes a lot of my class. I mean, I had a cush class. I mean, it was like wood shop and early dismissal. And like, I mean, English was probably the only hard thing I was taking. So he changed all of my classes, my cush classes, into like hard classes. And he said, you got to make all A's and B's to prove to me that you're going to come play for me and do what it takes for your school.
Get out.
So sure enough, I got after it and took it seriously, and that was really impactful. He's a godly man, and he invested in me, and so got my act together and finished school, high school, and went off to go play football at Stephen F. Austin. Gretchen at the time took her first college courses at a junior college. She was wanting to go to A&M, but she ended up going to pursue her teaching career from Stephen F. Austin, so we got to go off to school together. We were dating.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I assume you did the full 4 years?
I didn't. I was medical my sophomore year. And so when I was in 6th grade, I found that I had a heart, kind of a heart murmur. And they kept trying to figure out what it was. And my senior year, I had to wear a device, or I had to carry this device that would track my EKG system. And so that summer, they found it. It triggered, and they said, hey, you've got it's a arrhythmia. It's like a little extra muscle tissue in my electrical system where my heart races. And I'd just be sitting here and race to 200 beats per minute.
Whoa.
I said, you got two options. This is my senior year in high school and just graduating, about to go play football. I said, you got two options. You can take medicine the rest of your life, or you can try this new procedure where we go in and ablate it. I said, okay, what does that mean? Go through your arteries in your chest and then both groins. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And so this was like kind of a new procedure at the time. This is in '99. And so I was at Texas Children. I was 315 pounds, 6'5". They literally had to go get a different arm cuff because they didn't have one big enough for me at the Texas Children's Hospital. And so I went into surgery that year, and it was a success. Surgery, but something crazy happened during that surgery. I had a dream that I jumped off the table, like jumped. And so I'm in the recovery, and Gretchen's in there, my brothers, my sister, my mom and dad are in the room. And I said, Dad, I had the craziest dream. I was like, what? He's like, I jumped on the table. He's like, huh, tell the doctor when he comes in. So doctor comes in, said, I had a dream I jumped on the table. And he's like, oh, you remember that? I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, I lift your gown up, and I had burn marks. And so they had to use the paddles on me. And when I was in surgery, Parkinson white wolf, I think is what it's called, triggered. And my heart went into fibia. They had to shock it back into rhythm. And so,
Whoa.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy, crazy summer. Because a little bit later, the lady comes in and lifts my back up. My dad's like, hey, he's not supposed to move because his arteries are open or whatever. And like 10, 15 minutes later, sorry, this is a little graphic, but I was like, Dad, I think my catheter came out. He's like, what? I said, I think it came out. Like, I think I'm all wet down there. And so he pulls the sheets back, and I'm laying in blood. And she had opened up the artery.
Oh, no.
And so, yeah, they had to rush in. The lady's, like, holding me down and, like, super painful. And so, yeah, that was fun. And a month later, I was at home, and my dad made breakfast, and Gretchen came over, and I was like, man, I don't feel good. And I just started getting real sick, and they were like, we're not going to touch you. He took me to the hospital, and they're like, we can't touch you because you just had this procedure. We don't know what's going on. I ended up passing a kidney stone, 18 years old.
What?
Yeah, and then this is crazy. And then literally a couple of weeks later, I had a truck, and Gretchen and I went to the movie theaters, and walking out, I was like, I think my truck's been stolen. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, I just had this weird feeling. She's like, really? And we were down in Friendswood off of 45 at the theaters, and came out, we were with some friends, and sure enough, my truck was gone. And so literally back to back to back, all this. And then 3 weeks later, I went to two-a-days into football. And
yeah, I was going to say, you played football after this, right?
Yeah. And so I was on the field, went through practice, did everything. So my redshirt year, freshman year, and then my sophomore year, I was on the field and coming off of practice during two-a-days, my heart started racing. And I was like, that's weird. So I told Sandy, Coach Sandy, which was our trainer at the time, I said, hey, my heart's racing. So he took me into the gym or to the locker room, undressed, got showered, tried to get my heart rate down. And literally 2 weeks later, I was in Houston having a second surgery and some connected, don't know how, whatever, but they had to do a second ablation. And so went back and had a meeting with Coach Pierce and Chiswick and all them. And they said, hey, son, we love you, but you're done. And so I was medicaled and
Oh, no.
got to stay on the team and did film for them for a couple of years. And then senior year, I just stopped playing. It was pretty hard to, everything you worked up to is gone.
Yeah.
And the Lord had to just work on me in that and just that pride again. And just like, I should be out on the field. I'm up here filming. And so, yeah, it was a hard time.
Was there, I mean, a lot of times when we face that kind of a situation, we tend to default to the things around us to take away that pain, or were you just steadfast in giving that to the Lord, or?
No, I always had the intimacy with the Lord, I would say, in my life has always been close, but I haven't always been following him closely. And what I mean by that, in college, went out with the team, partied, and wasn't walking as I should as a believer. But I had intimate moments with the Lord, if that makes sense, in the sense of just talking and walking with him. I remember one of my good friends who was also medicaled, talking to him about the Lord because he was wrestling with it as well. And just that peace I had, knowing that the Lord was in control. I got to share that. I'll never forget. We were walking back from the cafeteria, and I was like, hey, God knows this did not slip his plan for you. And I'll never forget, he was like, what do you mean? I was like, God knows everything about you. He knows that you got injured. He knows I got injured. He has bigger plans for that. He knows everything that you do every day. And I said, he's sovereign. And he's like, oh, really? If God knows, does he know that he took his toothpick out of his mouth? Did he know I just flicked that on the ground? I was like, he does. And so even though I wasn't walking as close as I should have been with the Lord, I still was intimate with him and still having relationships with friends about who he was. And so the Lord used that time for me to share, I guess, in my own life. It was painful and hard, but there was still a peace knowing, hey, it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So would you say then that, of course, because we're working at getting to the wall that you had to overcome, would you say that was a precursor?
Absolutely.
Or,
Yeah, there was, I can go back in time. There's times in high school that a bunch of football buddies, they were going to a party, and I'll never forget, it was an off-campus party. It was down in Galveston or Clear Lake somewhere, and I was like, I'm going to go, and I just felt the Spirit say, you don't need to go. I'm like, I'm going to go. And I drove there, and literally standing outside, started to walk in, and I felt the Lord saying, do not go in those doors. And so I was like, okay, I'm here. My buddies are here. Like, this is going to be awkward. And I just remember grabbing two of my buddies. I said, hey, man, let's go to Waffle House. It's like right there. And they're like, no, dude, we just got here. I'm like, no, let's go to Waffle House. And it was me trying to divert. And so we went to Waffle House. We used to always do that as linemen. That's when they had the all-you-can-eat. And we would get thrown out of those places. But we literally walked to the Waffle House, and we're sitting there eating. And Chad, within minutes, like 5-6 cop cars pull up and just bust that whole party. And like all of our friends are walking out in handcuffs. No. And so I can share stories like that where the Lord just spoke to me and like just guided me. That was a precursor to the wall, I guess, as we would say.
Yeah.
And so just like that time in football, and just him speaking to me, that intimacy, and not always being obedient, but just being attentive to his voice started early.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you go ahead and graduate?
Yeah, I graduated, got married. We graduated, proposed to Gretchen a year, our senior year, and then we graduated in May of '99, got married in July of '99, and a company called Ferguson Enterprises was recruiting me to go work for them, David Vi, and took the job. And so we moved up on the north side of Houston, and so she became a teacher, and I was a sales rep for Ferguson Enterprises.
What did they do?
They're a plumbing supplier, so
Okay.
the nation's largest plumbing supplier, and so they had an amazing company model that they take you in and you learn everything from you start in the warehouse to where you learn all the products to you go to inside sell, or excuse me, to the counter to learn how to interact with plumbers and other people and learning their product, to inside sales, learning how to sell, and then to outside sales. And you could go to a track with either you're going to run a branch or a store, or you're going to go the sales manager route. And so in that process, I learned a lot. I mean, they teach you a lot about sales. They teach you a lot about systems and things. And so that was a precursor into, I wanted to always have my own business. And so I worked for that company for 3.5 years. Gretchen was a teacher, and we moved off in 1960, looking for a church home when we first got married. And one of her mentors said, "Hey, here's a flyer to this church. We don't go there, but we hear it's really good." And so we got the flyer and go attend our first service, and it's at Houston Northwest Church. And that was in October of '99.
Wow. So you guys have been going there ever since 1999?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
So we got married, moved up on the north side, and I told this 2 weeks ago. So our first Sunday, Roger goes in, Shirley come up to us, and they're like, "Hey, you're a new couple. We're going to take you to dinner, to lunch." I was like, I got scared. I was like, I don't know these people. I don't want to go to lunch with them. And so I was like, "No, we got stuff to do. Sorry, maybe next week." And so next week comes around, and here comes Roger, and he's like, I said, "Gretchen, we're not going to get out of this. We're going to go to lunch with them." And so sure enough, he comes up, "Hey, what are y'all doing for lunch?" I'm like, "We'll go with you." But that began an amazing journey. He's the one that taught me. I'm going to never forget. He was like, "Hey, I'm going out of town. I want you to teach Sunday school." I'm like, "Roger, I'm not teaching Sunday school." I'm like, "Wait." He said, "No, I'll teach you how to do it. I'll show you." So he became that father figure while I was here at church and part of their Sunday school class, doing life together. He owned a business. When we ended up buying our company, he helped me pray through that. We used to go up to church every Tuesday morning and pray, a bunch of us from the Sunday school class, early mornings. And so he was a spiritual father of mine very early on of our marriage.
Mm. What was it like? I mean, you and Gretchen have been together ever since high school.
Yeah.
And college, and then you get hitched. And what's married life like?
Yeah. So as a sales rep, this was pretty. When I finally made it to outside sales, I was given some pretty substantial accounts, and there were some expectations with those accounts. In fact, one time I got in trouble because I didn't spend all my monthly fees or amount, what do you call it?
Yeah, your budget.
On the customer. And so I was supposed to go wine and dine them. And I was torn because that was going against everything that I was supposed to do spiritually. And there's that expectation worldly to say, "Hey, you need to take care of this customer, take them out and do all those things." And we sponsored that. Ferguson sponsored Richie Petty's car, and we took people up to Dallas to race one time. And that was one of those turning points for me that was like, I had my feet on both sides of the fence. And the world aspect of being a sales rep and wining and dining, and then also Sunday morning and teaching Sunday school class, and later becoming a deacon and saying, this isn't right. And so had to make some really tough decisions while working, started getting made fun of. It was like, well, people would go out after work, take customers. I'm going to go, what are they going to do? Go study the Bible? Yeah, kind of making fun of me. But I don't want to dismiss that. I made some really, the Lord used that time, made some really good friends, and also just growing me, for preparing me for what was next.
Yeah, I've had those experiences as well. Um, so, was there any part of that job then that caused any friction at all?
Oh, absolutely. Towards the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was hard. I would never forget that. I gave one of my clients back, or they took it back basically because I wasn't whining and dining. But it was hard because I had really good friends there. And in fact, I was in a wedding with Michael, who was him and Heather were great friends of ours. And in their wedding, he became a sales manager. And then never forget walking into his office and telling him, "Hey, we just bought a business and I'm resigning." And Gretchen and I were at their house all the time, and it was painful. I heard him because I kept that from him. I never talked about that.
Mm.
But for a year, we looked for a business to buy, and so that was that transition, and probably didn't do it correctly in the sense of mending that friendship and walking with them. Later, we ended up going to a life group with them and sharing and things, but that transition was hard. But yeah, I think the Lord was using training or teaching me in that, and then also I was a deacon at the church for many years, and then became an elder, which would be 14 years now, a lay elder at the church, and Roger just mentoring me in through all that. So yeah, there were some things there that were painful, but also I think the Lord, when He was preparing me to move and preparing this next season, which was the business season, He was making things, and I still believe that to this day, and even in other transitions, He's closing the door and kind of making those relationships or changing that, preparing that transition to be ready.
Mm. All right, so I want to talk about what was the impetus for this change, but I also want to hone in on at what point in your journey up to this point has Scripture and scriptural study
Yeah.
been like, when did that become a part of your everyday?
Yeah, it was. It began when Roger. We were in his class and we were just doing the lukewarm church going,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't until he was like, "Hey, I need you to teach for me," and I was like, I remember telling Gretchen, I was like, there's no way. Like, I am not theologically sound. I knew the word. I knew what my dad taught me. I went to church, but it just felt heavier, weighted more. And we used to use the booklets. I think some classes still are, but we'd go through the book of the Bible and discovery books and stuff. And I remember reading through that, and I was just like, Gretchen, there's no way. Like, I can't fake this. Like, I'm going to get up there in front of people and, like, they're going to see right through it. So it was really just that defining moment of teaching when he was asked, to where I'm like, I need to take this more serious. And so I began to study more. I began to just have my daily reading, and not so much just reading to say it's done, that's checked off, but like, let's really, like, what does this really mean? And I remember buying Logos when it first came out.
Oh, really?
I had commentary, and I'm like, this is crazy. Look at this commentary. And so I started just reading through different commentary, whether it was good or bad, but it was just, I had a better understanding and the weight of like, hey, this is the word. And then it was more like, okay, how does this relate to where we are in life? And so trying to make that transition every time I taught, that was kind of that transitioning point to say, hey, this is more than just, we're going to go to church, we're going to pray. This was like, no, I really need to get into the Word. And so that was the moment when he started asking me to teach. And that was probably in 2003, 2004.
Wow, so Logos has been around for that long.
Yeah, it was like on a floppy disk.
Oh, no way.
It was like 12 disc.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
It is awesome, though.
Yeah, it is.
It's a fantastic program.
But yeah, I had I think it was floppy disk first, and then it was CDs, and now it's all digital.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is just kind of boggling my mind a little bit because you've had this close connection, this like intimate, having heard, as in the way that you hear from the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
But prior to any intentional, in-depth, being in Scripture and studying Scripture,
Yeah.
what do you attribute that intimate relationship with not having had an intimate time in Scripture or an extended, just making it part of your daily walk?
Yeah.
Like,
I think some of those things were just being taught, right? So I'll never forget. I think I shared this recently with some team members, but going back to my dad, I'll never forget. I was pitching this game, and it was pretty intense, and I was going against a guy that was really good, and he walked over to me in the dugout, and he was like, "Hey, you're not pitching for your coaches. You're not pitching for me. You're pitching for the Lord." And it just kind of hit me. It was just kind of like, okay. And he was just like, focus on the Lord. Just focus on what you're doing. You're honoring him. He's given you this gift. Pitch for him. And it's just something that was like clicked. And it was just like, that's weird, but okay. And so there'd be literally times I'm on the mound and just talking to the Lord as I'm pitching. And so that carried me to football. I mean, there's times where, gassing on the field and just two-a-days, and I'd just be like, Lord, and just talking to him. So I think that intimacy was just like everything I did. My dad would teach me that. Everything you do in life is for him. It's an audience of one. And he just drilled that in me. And I would always go back to that. So when you asked about the experience when I got medicaled in college, it went back to that. Lord, what are you doing in this? And he wouldn't tell me all the time or show me, but it would be later. It'd be like, okay, if I'd have come down this path or stayed on this path, I would have graduated a year later, which they won the conference and they all have rings. I don't.
Oh, no.
I would have graduated a year later. That might have changed the projection with Gretchen and I getting married. And so there's just pieces and nuggets when you go back and look and you just say, okay, thank you, Lord. Like you protected me in that. Like that was super painful and I didn't really want to do it, but you actually protected me in that. So from early on, and my focus was with the Lord. So even as pitching, even as playing sports, when I went to my focus time, it was that super hard time. We were talking before this about mowing and just how your mind gets clear.
Yeah.
And you're just going through the motions, but you're mentally super engaged. And so that started at a young age. And so even without, I read my Bible as a kid and did all that, but not the discipline that I have now. So yeah, that's when it started.
Man, that is, I'm going to process on that for a while. Because it's almost like the Holy Spirit can do, I guess it's like those people that get converted who've never seen a Bible in their lives.
Yeah.
But it's just,
Here's a great example of how that happened. Last week we were on vacation, and I was talking to Gretchen, and I said something to Gretchen. We're in the car driving. I just go, never mind. And she's like, what? I said, the Lord just said, no, you're not. Like I said something untrue about who I am. And I think there's just things that we're going through and processing worldly and earthly in our mind through this transition with our jobs. To where I said something and the Lord immediately said it to me. And he was like, no, you're not. And it was so clear. And I was just like, I just did that. And Gretchen's like, what? And I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. The Lord just said, no, you're not. And she laughs because she knows that. Like that's how I talk to him. like just throughout my day, or if I say something and he says something back to me, or it's just that intimacy. And I can't, there's nothing that articulates that or why. It's just that awareness of everything you're doing. It's almost that image that he's he's right here, and he's just listening to us, and he's talking to me. So yeah.
Man. So you're working at this job and wrestling with some of the moral quandaries that you're being faced with. Where does the idea for purchasing a business come from?
That started in college.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I had a business major, minor in marketing, and I've always wanted to own my own business. In fact, I had a professor that laughed at me because we went around the room and was like, okay, what do you want to do when you get out of college? I was like, I want to own my business. She's like, that doesn't work that way. And so I'm not going to say her name, but we were friends. After I bought her business, she has a boat down in Clear Lake. I went down and sat with her and shared with her. But my dad, again, graduating, said, you're not going to go buy a business. You're going to go work for someone, and you're going to learn at least 3 years. Then you can start looking. So that plan started back in college. That was always my desire in my heart.
Well, I mean, you could make the argument that in whichever grade it was, when you're doubling your money on fireworks, that the entrepreneurial spirit was strong.
Yeah. Well, I didn't tell you, in second and third grade, we lived on a golf course, and my brothers would go dive. I wasn't allowed on the golf course, but they would go diving, and I would steal their golf balls and go sell them. And then I used to go pick up rocks and sticks, and I would color on them, and then I'd go door to door and sell the colored and rocks and sticks as art. And yeah, I did that. I'd ride around. Oh, here's another one. My first job I got fired from. So I was playing outside, and this guy came up and said, hey, do you want a job? I was like, yeah, I want a job. And he's like, you want to throw newspapers? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So third grade, I got a newspaper route, and they dropped off these massive newspapers, and we had to roll them. And so during the week, it was super easy. I could roll them and put them back and put them on my bicycle and ride around the circle and throw newspapers. Sunday, that was a different story. Those things were thick. I mean, super Sunday paper.
Yeah.
So they're super thick. So my dad had to get up and I had to throw them before we go to church. And so, I mean, your hands are inked and they're just nasty. So I did that for 2 weeks. And then it was time for me to go get my check. So my mom took me my mom and my brother was with me, went to go get my check. And they're like, hey, you got to fill out this paperwork, and then you get paid, and filling out all your stuff. And they're like, wait, how old are you? And I told them, they're like, we can't pay you. Like you're too young to have a job. I was a big kid.
Right.
And so they're like, I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, you can't work for us. Like, there's an age limit. I think it was 12 or whatever it was. 10, anyways. And so I was like, oh, okay. And so my mom's like, wait, I mean, he's throwing a paper for y'all for 2 weeks. And so they ended up paying my brother. And so my brother paid me. So I always tell people I got fired from my first job. But yeah, I love working. I love all that. So yeah. So yeah, it started in college, and then for a year I looked for businesses through brokers. We looked at all kinds of different companies. And my oldest brother, who has a company, him and my dad came up with these formulas, and basically it was all a numbers game. So I'd look at the company, I could run a formula on the numbers, and I would basically know whether or not financially if that's something I'd want to invest in. Then it came down to, is that something I want to do for my life? And that's what my dad taught me. He's like, we looked at a landscape company, we looked at a rock and soil company over in Austin, and there was a formula that basically I wanted to pay the company off in 5 years, and that formula with the sales and overhead, all that, and just a formulation to say, hey, can I pay that off in 5 years? Can I make a living in that 5 years? And then afterwards, what would that income be based on different markers? And so that was kind of the formula I ran for a year and a half. And we came up with a company that a gentleman was retiring. It's a 50-year-old company. And so it was in construction. It's a commercial flooring company. And so the guy, his last name is Moody. And so the Moody family has been around Galveston and Houston for a really long time. So his heritage goes way back. But this company was 50 years old, and he was selling it. And so
wouldn't happen to be the Moody of Moody Gardens.
It's not the direct, but it's
that
all
family
the
line.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so yeah, we prayed about it, and I mean, I was 25 at the time, and I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. So Gretchen was teaching; she was pregnant with Kylie, and we made an offer. And so obviously, 25 years old, you don't have that kind of money to carry. And so I said, hey, this is going to be beneficial for your taxes if you carry it. Would you carry the note for me? The bank's not going to loan it to me. And so we were able to put up a down payment, and he carried the note, and I hired him back because I didn't know how to read blueprints. And so I didn't know anything about tile.
Yeah.
And so I hired him back, and he was something else, and had a reputation too. But he took me under his wing like a grandpa, and he taught me everything. And so we had, I think, 12 employees at the time, and the highest we got up to was 22 employees. But for 13 and a half years, we ran it, and then the Lord called me into full-time ministry. I was in my shower, and it was one of those things where the Lord's like, you're going into full-time ministry. And it was after being a deacon, after being an elder. I was about to roll off in 2 years of my eldership, a 6-year term. And we were actually the interim children's ministry when Lindy and Isaiah Stonecipher went back to Illinois or Indiana, somewhere. And we were teaching, Gretchen and I were teaching 5th and 6th grade students for 7 years. They went back home or got called back home, and the Lord was like, y'all need to step into that. So stepped into that, and I was in the shower, and the Lord's like, there's a couple years span here, but the Lord's like,
right.
you're going into full-time ministry. And I was like, that's weird. So I came out of the shower, and Gretchen was doing dishes in the kitchen. I said, you're not going to believe this. She was like, what? I said, the Lord just told me you're going into the ministry. And she goes, I know. I said, what do you mean you know? She's like, he told me that too. So I got real excited, and then I got real scared. I got excited. I actually told Steve, I was like, hey, man, you're not going to believe this. The Lord just told me this. He was like, I see it. I mean, you guys have a heart for the Lord, and you're doing stuff in ministry. Is it kids ministry? I was like, no, I don't know what it is. And he was like, oh, okay. And so I got real excited. Then I got really like, Lord, what are you doing? Like, I don't want to work at a church. Like, nothing against that, but like, back to the pride thing. It's like, at that point, we had a lot more employees. My wife's working together. I mean, we're best friends. We love working together. The business was doing really good. We paid it off in 3.5 years.
Wow.
Ate rice and beans for 3.5 years, but got confused. And then I got kind of like prideful. And I said, I don't want to do this. Like, you're going to change our standard of living. And I don't want to do that. It's like, you gave us this. Why would you take it away? And he had to break me of pride. And all that was going on at the same time as the church was trying to look at church planning, was trying to look at systems as far as structure, and do we get this XP operations, and just all that stuff was getting worked on. So that's kind of where we were in that transition of going from our business into ministry.
So pride, which I'm familiar with, how had that manifested itself in your life? Was there any like major ways that it had, kind of hindered you or bit you or anything like that?
Not hindered or bit, but I think it was growing. And what I mean by that was, and the kids, this was super impactful, that wall. The kids got to see all this. I was a big hunter. We had bought a property out in West Texas. I had deer leases. I had bird leases. The kids, if they needed a baseball bat, just go get it and not even think twice about it. So living, when things are going well and you're living in a way that's not as always thankful to the Lord, you're thankful because you're successful, right? And you're like, man, thanks Lord for doing this. But you're being frivolous, I guess. Just I wasn't really paying attention. So yeah, there wasn't this like, hey, this is what bit me in pride, but the Lord had to take me down significantly to bring me to where I needed to be. And what I mean by that is financially, I knew what those guys were making at the church, and I'm like, there's no way. Like, I'm going to sell my house. There's no way. And I'll never forget, we had this school, and it just reminded me of something my dad said. In our business, we were transitioning. One market was kind of softening or drying up, really, retail. And we started to make the decision to switch to educational sectors, building schools. And I'll never forget my dad. And I was like, man, this is a huge shift. I mean, this is like massive. Financially, we have to hire more people, all this. And he's like, just kept talking about it. And I talked to him daily about it. Finally, he's like, have you talked to the Lord about it? And I'm like, I'm not really, Dad. He's like, son, I love you, but don't talk to me anymore about this until you're on your knees and your face before the Lord. That's your heavenly Father. One day I will be gone, and you need to be speaking to him about this, not me. I love to talk to you about it, but we're not going to talk about it again until you tell me you've been on your knees and you hear from him. So that was, I mean, I went way back. I went probably 6 years prior to this. That was a huge impact as well, talking about hearing from the Lord. My dad would always tell me, hey, have you talked to the Lord about this? Have you heard from him? You haven't? Just pause, wait. Because no answer is also an answer. So he would teach me those things. Moving forward, though, I just remember, man, Lord, I make this much money. How are we going to do this? And I remember we had a school, and it got put on hold. It's like, that's weird. These schools never get put on hold. And it was like, 2009, we had a ton of schools in the books. One got put on hold, and they held the bonds the next year. And it was like, okay, what's going on? So the schools that we weren't getting, or they were on hold. And so that was a massive amount of our business. And I'll never forget, there was times to where it was just like I had to be dependent on the Lord. We had money coming in, but it wasn't coming in. I had a payroll. I had 22 employees I had to pay every week. And I just remember one time I was like, came home early, and Gretchen was like, what are you doing? I can't make payroll. Maxed out our bank as far as how much loan you can have to projects. And that's another story about Roger Goes. I'll tell you another time. But she's like, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know, Gret. Like, I don't know. And the mail person came early. And I was like, well, that's weird. They're here early. Went out there, opened up a check, massive check in there that we were expecting, just hit unexpectedly. And so I was like, all right, go put that in the bank. I'm going to make payroll. And so just things like that, the Lord walked us through and was with us, never left us during that time. But he had to say, hey, you have to depend on me, not your own doing. And so when we went through that hard time, I remember being up 2 a.m. I was like, I just have to bid more. I just got to work more. I got to crank out these bids. I'm going to do that. And I'll never forget the Lord. It's like 2 a.m. And it was so clear. Who do you think allows these bids to be awarded? I was just sitting there for a second. I was like, you're in control of everything, Lord. He's like, yeah. You're cranking out thinking you're going to do this. And I'm the one that allows the awarding of who gets what. And of course, the earthly's like, well, no, actually, the general contractor and the architect. So it's like, no, Lord, you are in control of everything. And I just remember putting my pencil down and I went to bed. And I got up the next morning. I was like, Gret, Lord just told me this. And he just had to work through us. There was a time where we thought we were going to lose our home because of that. And the Lord was just like, he was getting me to a point where I had to be so sufficient on him. And it was so hard. But the intimacy with him every day, I want that every day. I don't want to go through that. But literally every day, what am I going to do today, Lord? Like, what bed am I supposed to do? Who am I supposed to go talk to? I can tell you tons of stories in that. Lord continued to use us with our home. He's like, hey, you need to invite your friends over and neighbors over and feed them. I'm like, we don't have money to pay for all that. And we did it. I remember one time I was like, okay, we got like $2 to our name left. Thanks, Lord. Just that pride, arrogant kind of thing. And then, money would come in. But it's like being obedient. And so we went through a really hard time. And we put our business up for sale on the market. And
How difficult was it to get to that decision?
I think so. That was all going on when we were also talking about what this job at the church looks like, and I never forgot that. Never forgot, like, Lord saying you're going into ministry. I don't know what that is yet. And so when going back 9 years now, 10 years, and this position was made, and Steve's like, hey, we're going to put this out here and we're going to go look for this. He knew, I mean, we're close. He knew everything we were going through, walking through. And Gretchen had several people from church when they announced it said, hey, Dan would be great at that. And she'd come home and she's like, hey, someone just told me again that you'd be great at that. I'm like, don't worry about it. So Steve and I were going to a church planting conference out in Florida, and we did the fleece and Gideon. And he's like, hey, let's put out fleece. And if just to see what the Lord says in this. And if one of the elders recommends your name, then let's talk and let's do that. Let's put 2 weeks kind of a time frame on it. So I was like, yeah, let's pray about that and we'll put out fleece. And so we went out to Florida, went to a church planting conference, and a week went by, came home, and then 3 weeks. And I'd tell Gretchen, see, it's not happening. But 3 days before that came, one of the elders called Steve and said, hey, I think Dan needs to be at that position. So that's kind of the back end of that. And so the day that happened, that I was offered the position, that morning I got a call from my broker. And she's like, hey, you've got an offer on your business. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah. It had been on the market for almost a year.
Mm.
And that's how long it took to break pride and all that. I said, okay, that's awesome. That was at 9 or 10 o'clock. At 12 o'clock, or no, at 2 o'clock, 12 o'clock, I think Steve said, hey, can you come in at 2? Dwight and I need to meet with you. I'm like, yeah. So I went into his office and said, hey, we feel like you're being called here. And I said, I agree. And he gave me a yellow envelope or package, says, we want to offer you this position. I just started laughing. I was like, are you serious? And yeah, I said, I just got a call this morning. I had an offer on my business. So literally hours. And so yeah, walked through that, had some hard times with the new owner and all that, but the Lord released me of that and started the job and didn't know what I was doing. I knew construction at that point, but just had to rely on the Lord to walk us through that. And of course, we went into Harvey and got destroyed, and the Lord would wake me up in the middle of the night and just give me visions and talk to me. I literally had a notepad on my nightstand, and I'd get up and write things down. And Gretchen would be like, how do you know how to do this? I can tell you stories and stories, we don't have time. But I said, the Lord told me how to do this. And she's like, no, you didn't. She's like, you don't know electricity. Like, there's this thing that we had so much power coming into the thing, and it was like, oh, if we run this and that. And she's like, you don't know, like, you're not an electrician. How did you? And I'm like, the Lord literally was like, do this or call this person. Like, throughout that whole entire project, I can tell you story after story after story, and how the Lord was just like, here it is. This is this. Do this. And then John Roberts came beside his knowledge and everything, and the construction, and E.E. Reed and Kirksey. I mean, just learning from all that. But the intimacy and hearing from the Lord in that, I can tell you stories for hours about just different times that the Lord was like, here, this, that, and just walked us through that.
Wow. So what was the hardest part of that year then? Because I'm assuming like this is your first like big wall where you had to lay it all down. What was the most difficult part?
Yeah, so that the darkest, deep part of that wall, there was one morning where, so I'm getting chills thinking about it. There was a time where Gretchen took the kids to school, and so she left early and took the kids to school, and I was sitting in my office in our home. We had an office at our home, and I was sitting there and working, and then just Satan just started putting lies in my head, and it got really dark really fast. And sitting there just working and just thinking. And he was just like, "You're not a businessman. Like, look at your business; it's tanked." And it's like, you can't even provide for your family right now. And there's just lie after lie after lie, and it got really dark. Where even the Lord was like, Satan was like, "You're better off cashing in that life insurance policy for your family to survive versus you sitting here trying to act like you know what you're doing." I mean, it got dark. And I didn't have suicidal thoughts in the sense of like, okay, I'm going to act on this, but he was definitely trying to put that in my head in the sense of just failure and like you're not successful. And I'll never forget, Gretchen walked in the door from dropping off the kids and she was crying. I was like, "What's your deal? What's going on with you?" And just I was in this dark spot. And she was like, "I know what you're dealing with this morning." I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "The Lord's told me that I know what you're thinking." And I'm like, "Oh, really? If you know so well, why don't you just tell me?" And she started saying things that Satan was lying to me, and it freaked me out. I mean, I got weirded out, and we just stopped and just got on our knees and just praying. I mean, I was weeping. I was just like, "Golly, Lord, you are so in control, and I'm not." And it was just like, "Satan, get behind us, because I'm not going to fall for that." And like, I am a child of the Son, of the King of Kings. And I mean, it was so dark. And I don't want that on anyone, because it was weird in my office, because it got like, it got dark, like physically it was like dark because I was kind of just meditating. But the freakiest part of it was the void. Like, it felt like I was so isolated. Like, I can't explain where I was, but I was so alone. Like, I didn't even feel the Lord's presence. Like, it was so weird. And so it was like a void that Satan took me to that was just empty and just isolated. And so, man, that's the worst thing I've ever experienced in a spiritual battle, in like the deepest way. So that was the wall. And we just sat there and just prayed and wept and just said, "Lord, you're in control. Whatever you're going to do, this is not our business. You're in control. If you want me to go into ministry, we'll go into ministry. We trust you." And that was that breaking point.
Where was that in relation to the whole story?
Yeah, so that was a year. So right after we put our business up.
So that happened, and then there was a year of waiting.
Yeah, about 7, 8 months. In fact, 3 months after that, our business started getting better again.
Oh, whoa.
Like, we started picking up a lot of work, and I was like, "See, Gret, like, it was just a bad spot. We're not going to the ministry." She's like, I'm not playing. She's like, don't even think that. And so I was mentally like, "Oh, wait, this is just a joke." And like,
yeah,
we're keeping the business. And she's like, "No, we're not." But yeah, it was about a year when he did that, maybe 10 months. And then 3 months after that, we came out and started having better business. And I think that's what our books looked better and attracted a buyer.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Man, that's wild. It sounds like you and Gretchen have got a pretty special bond spiritually.
Oh, yeah.
Has that been always since?
Yeah, so when we started dating, she did not know the Lord. She grew up Catholic, didn't go to church all the time, always went on Easter, Christmas, and her parents divorced when she was 3 or 4. And so she would come over to my house and she'd be like, "This is different." Like, "What do you mean it's different? Like, how y'all's family is, like, this is different, like good different, but just different. Like, what is that?" And so I was like, "Well, because we love the Lord." And my dad always made it a point, and my mom, that whoever walked in that door would experience Jesus, and just they would get loved on. My dad was a big hugger, mom was. So it doesn't matter who you were. You walked through that door, you're getting loved on. And she was getting loved on. And so I was like, well, that's because we believe who Jesus is, and he loves us. So I got to lead her to Christ.
How old was she when you did that?
She was a senior in high school, and I was a junior in high school.
Man.
And so we dated 6 years before we got married through college, through college. But she didn't know who the Lord was in that aspect. She knew who he was in the sense of going to church, but not intimately. And so even today, we share our struggles. And I tell that to young families. It freaks them out. You have to be in a position where your wife understands or will receive that and not just go crazy on you. But I share crazy things that come in my mind. Hey, I need you to pray for this, and I don't know where this came from, or just things that I wrestle with. And in that wall moment, she would tell you that she would look to me for dependence. Like, hey, how are we doing business-wise, right? Financially, security. Always looking to me. When I finally told her, I don't know, Gret. I don't know how this is going to work. Before we hit that wall that morning, that time, the Lord was showing her, hey, yeah, you have a husband. You need to look to me, though, for that dependence and for that security. So that's what she realized in that. Our kids, still to this day, my youngest is Ryan, is too young to remember this, so he doesn't have that effect. We joke with him, but our kids to this day, hey, if we go get a Sonic drink on happy hour at 79 cents, whatever it costs, I don't know, but they're like, thank you, Dad. Before, they didn't have that. Now they realize, hey, everything, they're more grateful for everything we do, and they understand that because God told us, let your kids see this. That pride moment is guys. I mean, I remember I told one guy, I said, if another person says, hey, I'm praying for you, I said, I'm going to punch him in the face. I said, I don't want to hear I'm praying for you anymore. Like, that's enough. But it was pride. But I remember another time where he's like, your kids need to see what I'm doing through this. And they saw from going from abundance of just, hey, go get whatever you need, and we're going to go wherever, to, hey, we can't afford that. And like, seriously, you're going to have to wear those shoes again for another 2 years or whatever, or a year or whatever it was. School year, I guess. It has changed the way they look at things today. And so that was just another way the Lord used that time to impact another generation.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah. So you make this transition into working for the church. Was this like a brand new role they created?
Yeah. So it took a part of, so Dwight was administrative pastor, did a lot of the facility piece as that as well, but they kind of made a new role. It was operations, and then at the time we had an XP. So it was kind of split in two, and then 2 years into it, we didn't have an XP anymore. So I kind of took over those all pieces. So it was a new role from the aspect of overseeing all those items. Yeah.
What was that transition like?
Learning curve. Our previous XP taught me a lot. Dwight taught me a lot. But yeah, it was different. And because I came from corporate world to where it's like, oh, that person doesn't do this. Okay, we need to take care of that. To where Steve would always have to tell me, hey, it's different in church world. Like, they go to church here, their family goes to church here. Like, it's a bigger impact. Like, you need to walk beside them. And that was the biggest thing. Is really, it's like your children, right? It's like you don't fire your children. You have to teach them and bring them along and like have grace. And so coming from corporate world into church world and being grace filled and walking, that was a big challenge for me.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect of it was learning. You always go in or you think you have a plan. It's kind of like Kirk taught on today. It's just like, no, God knows better. And so not to let that pride rear up to say, hey, I know how to do construction, or hey, I know how to do those things, and realizing that I don't know how to do anything. The Lord will give it to me when I need it. And just relying on that, it takes that self-promotion out of the picture to where you're just like, okay, Lord, we need to do that, or we need you to do that. But yeah, it was a big learning curve.
Yeah, I bet.
From corporate world to nonprofit, and then learning those things. Don Howard, who's been at the church forever, he would help me coach. Hey, well, think about it this way. He's very, very wise, and so just having a ton of people around you, and just listening for the Lord to guide. Yeah.
How long was it between you taking that position and then when Harvey hit the church?
So I started in October 2015. So when was
Less than 2 years.
Yeah.
It was August 2017 when Harvey hit.
Yeah. And that's, man, that was weird. I remember it hit. I came up there. They're like, how'd you get up there? I'm like, don't worry about it. I went off 249 on the overpass in my truck and went straight down and got to the church, and I saw water coming in, and it was just like, it wasn't coming from the flood, it was coming up through the toilets. So it was coming in the hallways. The static pressure was pushing the plumbing out through the toilets, and it started in the hallways. And a year prior, in the tax day flood, we didn't get hit. I mean, it came right up to the door, and it didn't affect us. But then the water came in there, so it stunk. I was walking through that with Gretchen, and it was weird. I just went into this mode of like, we had a phone call, got on a Zoom, and Gretchen had this big, huge whiteboard in our office from already, and I just started whiteboarding. Okay, staff. When we realized that everything was bad, okay, staff can go here. I mean, we just started plotting everything. It was like,
immediately.
It's the Lord. It really was. It wasn't anything I knew. And then people just started coming in and helping, and it was crazy. I mean, you saw that, and the team just went into a new level of just working and just making it happen. It was fun. It was not scary, but like just a lot of work. I'll never forget. I mean, we were cranking hours, and from 4 or 5 in the morning, we'd get up there and then come home at 7, 8 o'clock at night. I remember there's a lady that amazing member of our church who used to live in our neighborhood, and she would cook dinner, and she would take our kids and some other kids, and they'd be in the pool, and she'd be like, hey, whenever you get done, come eat dinner. So like, okay, go over there, eat dinner, and then go back up there, and then but we were cranking a ton of hours. Wow. Yeah.
That's so sweet to have church family.
It was.
It's such a blessing.
Yeah.
So you've recently accepted another change.
Yeah.
Has that been something that's been coming for a long time, or that you've been wrestling with, or is it just one of those things that just happened?
If we have time, I'll take you on the journey.
Yeah.
So prior to even me starting my job at the church, the first time I got to experience KDSC and the kingdom, right? We talked about the kingdom. It was 10 years ago. I was on that trip to Florida. And I got to see Steve with his spiritual brothers and a spiritual father of GlocalNet group and his sons. And he's one of the sons. And it's kind of like, this is weird. Like, I haven't experienced anything like this. This is unique. We were trying to figure out how we're going to become a church planting church, H&W. And one of those sons came, and we were interviewing people from all over the country. And like, okay, there's all kinds of systems about church planting, right? And this one guy came, and he started talking about the kingdom. The kingdom's here and now, not in the future. I mean, it will be when the Lord reconciles everything. But I'm like, wait a second, time out. That's so different than anything I've been taught growing up. I'm like, that's, Steve, it just grabbed me. And it was like, that's different. Why is that different? Like, I know the Lord, but that's different what he said. And he starts laughing. He's like, yep, it is. And so I said, I got to know more about that. And he's like, well, hey, he and one of my buddies are teaching a church planting conference in Las Vegas. Why don't you call him and see if you can go? So I went out there. I flew out there, and I went as a representative, as an elder of the church. And I sat with a bunch of church planters, and I'm like watching all this. I'm just like, my brain's getting just, KDSC is what it is, Kingdom Church, a Disciple Society Church. And they're all talking about church planting. They're like, hey, you going to church plant? I'm like, no. Not church planting. I'm like, I'm a businessman. No. And so that was the first taste of that. And I came back and Steve joked, and he's like, yeah, you drank the Kool-Aid, didn't you? And I'm like, yeah, something's different. So I just kept, the Lord grabbed me on that, and I just kept pursuing that. So at that training, you would go back after 3 months, you'd go back to a second session. And this was all like, hey, the Lord, by that time where the Lord's like calling you into ministry. So I was kind of getting confused of like, I'm not church planting, I'm not going to children's ministry. What is it?
Mm.
So I went back to the second session, and again, this is when they do their prospectus and do all their stuff for church planting. It was just phenomenal. And we had a meeting that next night. I flew back from Vegas, and we had a meeting at the church with a guy named Omar Reyes. Omar was working for GlocalNet. So we meet with the elders at the time, and we're like, okay, this is what church planting looks like. This is how we do that, and just all of that. And I was talking about KDSC. And I'll never forget, I left the senior, we were in senior pastor's office, and I was driving home. I was on Spring Cypress, right in front of Wynwood, and God said, you need to do this. I was like, wait, what? Like, you need to do this. And what he was referring to is that grid that we see, where it has society,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've got all these different society, agricultural, business, nursing, or medical, all these different parts of society that are the grid of everything, right? And he said that, I'm like, I don't get that, Lord. What do you mean? I'm not a church planter. What do you mean you need to do this? And he says, you need to do this. And I was like, okay, what does this mean? And like literally, I'm in front of Wynwood. I'm driving home in Glenlock. And so by the time I got home, he said, this is what you need to do with your family. So it was 10:30 o'clock at night. It's like, Gretchen, get in here. The Lord just told me I need to do this. And she's like, what are you talking about? So on our kitchen counter, I took a dry eraser marker, and on our island, I said, hey, this is the grid of society, right? And we need to do this. I'm sitting there staring at this, and I'm like, what does this mean? She's like, I don't know. I was like, so I erased it. And then I drew a circle, and I put a W. And I said, okay, this is our family. What are we involved in? Okay, so I drew a line out, and I said, okay, Moody Tile, that's one. That's our business. Okay, the Hostler Elementary, our kids go to school there. Lacrosse, Klein Lacrosse, our daughter's in that. So we just started like, what is our kids involved in? I was just sitting there going, okay, what is this? I was like, great, let's just pray. And so we're sitting there praying, and I felt like the Lord was like, you need to engage in Hostler Elementary. You need to engage in lacrosse. So like, okay, that's weird. So we just kept praying about it. And fast forward a couple months later, they asked, hey, we need an assistant lacrosse coach. Will you coach our team? I'm like, no, play lacrosse, play football. They're like, no, seriously, would you do it? I'm like, okay, what does that mean? They're like, you got to go to school, like to go get class certified. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. So started engaging, was on the field with all these junior high girls at the time, and just like, okay, we're engaging there. Let's see what the Lord does. Our kids' school. One of the church planners, the sons, Kevin Cox, has this thing where he and his whole church would take Sonic drinks. All right, so we started taking, just Gretchen and I would take Sonic drinks to the entire school the Friday before spring break. And the week before, we'd go in there and we'd ask what their favorite drink was. So we had their whole order, and then her and I would literally go around to every single school teacher, cafeteria worker, custodian, and give them all their drinks. We did that for 2 years. And they're like, why do you do this? And at the time we were doing We Love Hugh, and I was like, oh, it's because we love you and all this stuff. And it was like, we're just engaging in this school. Then it was like, Gretchen's like, I think I'm going to substitute. I think I'm going to just volunteer and substitute teach there. We still had our company at the time. I was like, okay, great. Towards the end, when we had an offer on the business, they were like, hey, we want to hire Gretchen as a teacher. And she's like, I can't. I have a company, and at the time, the owner hired Gretchen back and said she's under contract for 6 months. So she couldn't go work there. I became the watchdog dad,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to speak in front of all the guys. I became the director of the watchdog dads, and I was up there all the time. And so in all that, I'll fast forward, they offered her again. So she took a full-time substitute teaching role. Then they offered her to be a teacher, and she took that job. That was the same time I took the job at the church. So I gave you just like a year and a half span of what we did from all that.
Yeah.
So she became a teacher. I was still engaged in that school. I did a funeral for a mom that was a teacher. Later down the road, when I became a minister on church, a kid was dying as a teacher. Her son was dying. We went to their bedside. There's so many ministerial things that we got to do at that school. Our kids were, going through it, and I'm fast forwarding, but there's so many things, multiple divorces that we walked through with teachers and their family. And so God used that, and that was our domain. So God was showing us not a societal domain, but he was saying, hey, this is where you are engaged in society, and this is the direct areas, and I want you to focus on these two areas. So I'm kind of jumping around, but you get the gist of what he spoke to me coming back from that training to what we did for a year and a half and engaging in that school, or 2 years really, engaging in that school to where Gretchen went to go work there, and she did that for all the way up until last year.
And so by engaging, you're not just talking about like sharing the gospel, or like what maybe help our listeners understand what does it mean to engage with your domain.
So she was an educator, so that was easy for her, right? But how do I go engage at a school? I'm not an educator. I developed a relationship with the principal and the assistant principal. I would go in there and help them build systems, not systems like overall, but things like, hey, you need a tutoring program. Okay, how can we set that up? How can we get tutors? Because our church was doing tutoring, and we weren't in this school, but I was kind of saying, hey, if we set this up to where people come in, so it's things like that. I helped them with book deployment. I helped them with, they had to, over the summer, they had to take all the furniture and redeploy it. So just building little spreadsheets and things like that, I helped them with. So I had a business aspect of those things. From the front desk, I helped Maria for a long time do stuff at the front desk. So there's things that were business aspect that I could speak into, and like, hey, let me take that from you, and I'll go help you with that. Then I'd grab some watchdog dads, and usually that was just kind of like hey, walk around the school while you're here, to where I got them tutoring. So it was like, hey, go up here. These classrooms and these hallways are going to have buckets of things to do, but they're really like math skills. And so have the teacher. So building a system where the teacher would send a kid out to a watchdog dad who was background checked, and simple games is just sitting down with a kid and you're doing stuff, but it's helping them in education, and that dad can do that. I mean, it's super easy. So it was engaging them more than just, hey, go have lunch with your kid or go walk around the school, to, hey, pull a kid out of your classroom and help them. So that's engagement.
So you just took the skills that God gave you and put them to work in other areas.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So that was my first introduction to GlocalNet. And then I was working at the church, and this was after Harvey. We were already in our new adult building. Steve said, hey, a guy named Daniel's going to call you. He works for GlocalNet, works with Bob, and they need some help. I'm like, great. So Daniel calls me. He's like, hey, do you know anything about Salesforce? I'm like, it's a CMS program. They're all pretty much the same. Yeah. And he's like, hey, would you be willing to volunteer and help our CMS program? I'm like, yeah, great. So it's database, basically, customer management systems. And so I helped him with that. And they're like, hey, we don't have one for multi-faith. Would you build one out? I was like, yeah. So I built out their MFN's Salesforce database. So they do dashboards, all that stuff, track everything. And so that went on for about a year. And then he's like, hey, would you help with our finances? I'm like, sure. He's like, we run QuickBooks. I'm like, yeah, I ran QuickBooks with my business. Pretty familiar with it. So I started volunteering and helping GlocalNet run their business and do all their books. And I did it with Multi-Faith Neighbors Network. And so I did that. and now it's been 3 years. And so Steve's allowed me. That's my domain work. That's my engagement and helping these organizations financially just run their books, and then it just continued to grow into other systems and to just helping them and just being a part of those organizations. All the way up until this last February, to where the founder is also now the president and CEO of another organization, IGE. So it's 4 organizations now, and he's asked me to come on and be the chief operating officer to help the systems and operations of all those organizations. And so that's the transition that we're doing now. So I've been with this organization, or both of these organizations, they're all connected, for over 3 years volunteering. And so Lord just kind of continued to grow that relationship to where this ask. And same thing with Harvey. I can tell you stories literally from just this last year to now, that the Lord using us and using me in crazy ways. Like we just signed a lease in DC, and just, hey, negotiating that was crazy. It's only by the Lord that he did that. But getting used from the Lord through that was awesome. And so that's the transition that we're moving to. And so September 1, I'll officially be in that position. We'll still go to church. Our kid's a freshman, and we're still churches. Houston Northwest is still our church home. So, but just transitioning.
So, I mean, we love crazy stories. So, if there's like maybe one or two that you can just pull off the top of your head of what he's done in the last year as you've been working through this.
Yeah, you mean with the new,
or just moving towards this new.
Yeah. So, so these organizations talk about freedom of religion and work with different people, from imams to rabbis to people of no faith to just everyone across the board, and recognizing that we have differences in our faiths and beliefs, but we want to work together. And so there's people that they work with that they work with ambassadors and people of government, of high-ranking officials, and get asked to go into parts of the world that are war zones, and so these organizations are vital in building bridges, and they're vital in implementing peace. And so some of these one of the crazy stories is witnessing. A Multi-Faith Neighbors Network does a retreat where they bring imams, pastors, and rabbis together. And this one retreat, I was in another country, and it was mainly imams and pastors. And there was some tension in the room. I mean, there was some major tension. And one of my colleagues, Micah, was like, "This is about to go off the rails. I mean, it's not good." And so you could feel it. I mean, it was just like, and there was government officials that oversee religions in the room. There was people that were in the room that were not supposed to be there, from another country that their government said don't go. There was people in the room that were ambassadors. There was people in the room that were from the media. And so all these people are in the room watching this conference, and there was major tension. And we had people with us, and one of them said, "Hey, we need to work through something. We don't know what it is, but we need to clear the air." And these retreats really take people, the clerics, from their calling of faith and their calling into the ministry, and it takes them through their journey of what God has done for them to where they are now, to their struggles. And a lot of them are similar, from pastors to imams, and then recognizing that they want the best for their community. And that's how we end the retreat, of working on a project together, recognizing our differences, but we're going to work together to show society, to show our congregants that we can disagree, but work together for peace. But there's tension in the room. And this imam finally stood up, and he was the major regional imam, and he said, "We can't move forward until we address this video. And a guy I was with that was leading the conference says, we're not going to show any videos. And he's like, we're not moving forward until we show this video. And so finally they show the video, and it's this lady praying. It's a Christian lady praying, and basically she was using verbiage that was harmful and hateful towards imams or towards Muslims. And so one of the young pastors stood up and said, hey, that was at my church. I wasn't there, and I want to apologize. That's not our intention. And we're sorry that happened, and we're sorry that that kind of verbiage, hatred, came toward y'all. And so at that moment, it broke down, and they started to have conversation. And so, I mean, literally, at the very beginning, it was like this thing's, where it's a 3-day conference, and it's about to be over, to where that guy apologized, it was received, and we moved forward. By day 2, at lunch, we all eat together, we're laughing, we're joking. By day 3, we're like, hey, it's a major transformation. And you see these guys that come in that are very formal, to where it's like, I don't know anything about you. I know on the news you hate me, I hate you, all those things, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much polarization, and it's broken down in 3 days. And whether your faith, whether you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, any other faith, we go back to the basis of Genesis, and God's created everyone in His image. And recognizing we have major differences in our beliefs, but recognizing ultimately that we were all created in His image, and then ultimately that we can work together, and we can break down some of these things that are causing tension in the world. Crazy story from going from major tension to laughing, joking, realizing that we are human and we're going to work together. It's huge. It's crazy. And the latest one I was in Ghana, there were some ladies there from a college here in America, and they made a comment that were like, I can't believe we're sitting in a room listening to y'all talk about the realities of what you think about each other. I mean, they're like, oh, you want to kill us, or oh, you think we're whatever. And they're like, they're not, like, they're actually having conversation, and then we're getting somewhere. And so that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is not common.
No, it's not.
At all. Especially with all the keyboard warriors and all of the nastiness that goes on out there.
It is.
It's like exposing the humanity of a person and having to deal with them face to face.
Absolutely.
So powerful.
It is. So that's what these organizations get to do. They get to go into really hard places. They're asked by governments, and they hold retreats, they hold conferences, teachings, to where people get to use their domains. We have retreats with clerics, and ultimately it's to build bridges, and then also just to deliver peace and to work on reconciliation, which ultimately that's what God's going to do.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah.
So is that going to have you traveling to all kinds of different parts of the world?
Yeah, so I'll stay in Houston. Our offices we just opened in D.C., and then they're also in Keller, Texas. We have people all over the country, but yeah, I'll probably be traveling up to D.C. quite a bit, and also to Keller, Texas, and hopefully to other places in the world. We're doing retreats all over the world right now.
Yeah, you better make sure you get one of those double-paged passports so you have room for all the stamps.
I can only hope. It's really fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun to go into some of these places.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I think we could probably move towards closing up.
Yeah.
But I really am curious to know, it sounds like your dad was such a phenomenal guy.
Yeah.
Would you share with me and with just whoever listens to this, what is the best thing, your greatest memory, the best lesson learned, whatever that is?
Yeah.
I want to know it.
Sorry, I'm getting emotional now thinking about him. He loved people well, and I think I got to experience something maybe my siblings didn't. As the last child, You know, they were all the test dummies. and so, uh, I think that getting and being so separate in age, it was almost like I was an only child. And so I just got his teachings, and they were so profound, Chad. And I think that I would say he saw people as Christ saw people. And so he wanted the best for everyone. It didn't matter who you were. And that's what God wants. That's what Jesus wants. He wants the best. And it almost goes back to what I said earlier about what the work we're doing. We're all created in the image of God, right? And he said that it's good. Not these people are good and those people are bad. It's good. And I think I saw that from my dad from the youngest age to where it didn't matter who you were. Everywhere we went, he just always looked at the best in someone. And he would give a word of encouragement. His last night that he lived, he came to our house to watch our son play flag football. And he said, "Hey, let's go get some pizza." And my son went with us. And I'll never forget this. He told the lady that he was at Pizza Hut picking up the pizza. And he said, "Hey, you really got a nice smile. God gave you a great smile." And she just said, "Thanks. That's never had someone say that to me." And he's like, "Yeah, just make sure you're smiling." And just little things like that encourage people. My son Luke said, "Dad, I remember he told that lady she had a great smile." And I said, "Yeah." And so I would say this, and we practice this with our kids when they have friends over, when they have now they're dating, and we have moments on the back porch or wherever we are that we invest in them. And we share our life stories. My dad shared his stories. But in the back of your mind, I would say always keeping the image of that person and how God created them. Mm-hmm. And just how you talk to them, and just, I share with how God speaks to me, right? And like even when you're talking and you're just like, "Lord, what do you want me to say to this person?" You'll find out a lot because you're thinking about how the Lord thinks of that person. Mm-hmm. And I just got that verbiage recently in some conference we did about, what does God say about you? I witnessed that growing up. Mm-hmm. My dad was not perfect. My family was not perfect. We had a lot of things go on. But I would say the best thing that he taught us was to love people well and see them as Jesus sees them.
Amen. Yeah. Well, it's a perfect way to end, I think. Well, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed Dan's story and you were inspired by it or gratified by it, please just do us the favor of giving us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel, because we just want to make sure that testimonies like this are reaching as many people as possible and encouraging them in the ways that they need. So, Dan, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, y'all.